Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 4:45, and it's time to open the hearing session for the next part of Matter 10, which concerns Bermondesy and Blackfriars road areas. My name is Philip Meineman, my colleague is David Spencer, and we are appointed by the Secretary of State under Section 20 of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act to carry out the independent examination of the new Southwark Plan. I'm not going to do another full introduction again. Now, in terms of participants, Ms. Seymour, is it just yourself and Mr. Sakaris for this session? You're on mute, Ms. Seymour.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's mainly me, and then Mr. Sakaris if we need him to join us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little unclear if we have any other participants, because I know Mr. Brearley from Vital OKR had expressed a desire to attend a number of.
Yes, Inspector. I sent him the link before we went on break, but I'm going to send it to him again. He can't see it, so he will be joining us in a couple of minutes.
He is he? Okay, thank you. Well, he's not missing a tremendous amount at the moment, so. All I was going to say was, Ms. Seymour, just in terms of the discussion we had in the previous session, and you mentioned about potentially updating EIP 82A again in respect of some of the information that's informed your site delivery timeframes, phasing, etc. Having discussed the issue with Mr. Spencer over the gap in sessions, I think we're perhaps both of the view that at the moment it might be appropriate for you to make those points orally at the land supply session, and then possibly update one or other of the documents following that to be submitted into the examination. And the reason for that is I think we're both a little concerned that it's not going to give if you were to do it beforehand, it probably won't give us or indeed other participants enough time to go through it, as we've got quite a lot of sessions between now and then and very little non-sitting time. So just to be warned, obviously have that information in your bottom drawer, so to speak, and we will probably ask for it post the session. It seems to be the best way of dealing with it. In that regard, I'm going to perhaps we'll just be mindful again that my discussion at the Mr. Brearley is in the process of joining us. Hopefully he can hear us all, if indeed we can't yet see him. But I just need to again, thank you, Mr. Brearley. I just need to sort of reiterate that we do need to be finished by 5 o'clock today, and unfortunately there's not a lot of flex in that, as I have another pressing commitment that unfortunately I can't put off, but hopefully we should have ample time to move things forward. So without further ado, I'll move on to item 1, which is a sort of general point in terms of the soundness of the Bermondesy area vision. My main point really that I wanted to sort of ask the council was, it was actually similar to that which we had for the previous session, was around the sort of growth opportunity section of that part of the vision. In particular, on the basis that should that section of the vision policy provide more clarity that essentially the majority of the growth in this vision area is being delivered through the biscuit factory site, which has got permission.
Yes, sir. So there's 2 issues around this. One issue is that with the inspectors suggested that we put on some, I think it was yourselves, putting the neighbourhood forum boundaries onto the visions map. And in doing that, we found that one of the neighbourhood forums was across a number of maps, which is the Old Bermondsey Neighbourhood Forum. And so for this one, there's an option of that they're in Bermondsey and in London Bridge. So I did raise this yesterday, that for the area of this vision, that we would be proposing an amendment we said, I explained yesterday, we will be proposing amendments anyway, because we're going to put these vision areas on the proposals map. But all of the other vision areas have just got a new outline on the current blown up map that's shown in the plan, and the policies map has been updated, and we're going to put all that on the proposals map. But for the Bermondsey Village Forum, the neighbourhood forum, because they're across the maps on pages 46 and 63, we need to amend the well, we have two options. We can amend the Bermondsey vision or the London Plan vision, or both. So my proposal is to amend the Bermondsey vision to include the entire Bermondsey Village neighbourhood area. Now, I suggest we, rather than discuss that today, if possible, so we could discuss that in the London Bridge session, because there's different views on where that boundary should be, and all of the representatives who have those views are coming to the London Bridge session, because that's how we had planned it before we looked at moving the boundary. But I just felt that I should raise that with you now because of your question about delivery. I mean, the answer is still yes. Most of the delivery for this area was in a previous AAP, which was set out in a previous plan, and now in this plan it would be through the biscuit factory, because this area, Bermondsey, did have an action area previously in a previous development plan, and there was a considerable amount of development that came forward as part of that. And then we removed that action area status, and now there are not there are only a few sites here. If we brought in the Bermondsey neighbourhood area from the London Bridge map, that wouldn't affect the delivery, but we can discuss that hopefully under the London Bridge session if you agree. And that's the map in EIP 181 that we're updating. I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear you. So you're on mute.
Apologies. Yes, there was a separate plan showing all the vision areas on a single borough-wide base that came through this morning, I think.
Yeah. So that's an updated plan. So that's EIP 181, and that was just updated to show this boundary area. So we provided that following the first session, and that was and then this is just one amendment that we're suggesting, and it's just appeared now because we think that it would be more helpful to have the neighbourhood forum in one vision rather than having it split between a number of vision areas.
I think the only thing I would say is, again, is it necessary for soundness on the basis that there are potential implications in terms of, and again, I don't want to sort of make this up on the fly, but just as a marker, it's just being clear about whether, because it could still be sound to show the neighbourhood forum area across 3 boundaries, which would have less impact on the existing vision areas. Okay. And therefore, again, I don't want to preempt what my colleague and I might conclude, but one approach may be a more straightforward factual amendment by putting an existing designated neighbourhood forum area on a plan, and another one might be a main modification. And if it's the latter, that obviously has implications in terms of our reporting, etc., as well as what the justification is. So I think I'll probably park it there for a moment, but thank you for flagging it. I think what I was more sort of concentrated on was the text of that growth opportunity section,
Yes.
and whether that adequately reflected in terms of the vision for the for this part of the borough, whether it was clear that it was principally the biscuit factory site that was the major contributor. As I read it, it was quite that growth opportunity section was perhaps quite generic, and whether that was
yes. So I mean, the biscuit factory has been approved now and is likely to be delivered very soon, and so that is the key site, but that is going to change the area and is getting delivered now at the moment.
Again, it perhaps comes back to the discussion we had in the previous session about the relationship between the visions, the SP policies, and the site allocations. And I think we said we'd mark that down as something that perhaps needed consideration as a modification to make that golden thread clear in the growth opportunities section. But I wouldn't perhaps provide a definitive view on it now. So on that basis, I think that's probably as much as I had in terms of the questions that haven't been answered in terms of matters which are in your hearing statement. I've got those, and I've obviously taken those as being read. So I'll give participants, Mr. Brearley, if he had a point on the Bermondsey area vision overall before we move on to the specific sites themselves. No, I don't see any hands. Splendid. Okay, well, in that case, I'll move us along the agenda to the aforementioned biscuit factory site. Apologies, and papers. Now, obviously, this scheme has planning permission that was granted by the mayor in his role as local planning authority. I just wanted to understand, obviously the council was in the first instance the local planning authority for that until such time as the scheme was referred. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And if there was a situation where such a scheme ever lapsed, we'll probably come on to lapse rates and so forth when we come to the housing land supply session. But essentially at that point, would the council return to being the local planning authority, or would that become the mayor? Does it?
No, I think it would be us, because it's just for this permission. But if there were any further changes to this permission, then that would have to go back to the mayor. That's my understanding of how it works.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. And in terms of the profiling again of the dwellings on site, again, what information has informed those splits? Again, it sort of looks like you've got sort of fairly similar 179, 180, 189 across years 2022 through 25.
So that's based on looking at the conditions discharging. We've had, sorry, could you excuse me a second? One moment. Sorry, sir. Approximately 14 conditions have been discharged, and we've got 18 conditions pending, and it's the whole site that is being developed. So from discussions with the GLA, and this is what we think will come forward. So I recognise it's quite uniform, but usually with these sizes of schemes, they can the developer works on looking at how many can be built and how many can be sold each year, and so that's why we've set out this as the schedule.
Okay, I'm just reminded that I did ask, I think, an MIQ regarding water infrastructure, which I think was raised as a concern much earlier in the plan preparation process through representations. again, I think whether you can answer it today or whether it's something that perhaps needs to come through, was whether one of the discharge conditions was the one relating to water, which obviously was a prior to occupation sort of limiting condition.
I can check that for you. In matter 10A, we've got the number of the condition 39. So that's a prior to occupation. So that I doubt that one has been provided yet. I will double check that specific one for you. I can do that.
I think probably what we'll need to understand when we come to the sort of land supply session again is whether there are any other sort of prior to occupation type conditions or other matters where there might be an implication on completions and thereby occupations. So if you don't have that information to hand today, then obviously that's probably something that we'll come back to either through the land supply session or probably in the note that you'll end up providing us afterwards, I suspect.
I'll prepare all the others for the following sessions from today, so I've got them already.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Again, this is a scheme that, on the basis that it has permission and is moving forward. I don't have further questions on. From my perspective, I think I've asked everything that I wanted to in that regard. So again, I'll open up for any comments on NSP 10. No? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to NSP 11, which is the Tower Workshops site. Forgive me. Scroll down to that. Now this is a scheme that's, I believe, is owned by the council. That's correct?
Yes, sir. This is a council site.
And in terms of proposals at the moment, obviously there's no existing planning information. So perhaps a similar question that I've asked in previous sessions is how the sort of floor space and dwelling targets have been derived for this site.
We think that with the current business space that at least that amount should be re-provided moving forward, because it's important to make sure that where there's an increased uplift for development, that there's also the opportunity to keep the current employment space. And so that's our approach on this site.
Thank you. And in terms of the residential capacity of 178.
Oh, sorry. That was we used the design led. So we looked at all the factors. We worked out the FAR. We did a capacity assessment, and then we discussed it with our colleagues, such as Mr. Zukaris and in development management. And from those assessments, this was the reasonable capacity, the indicative capacity that we felt could come forward on this site.
Okay. And just in terms of future delivery, again, I'm mindful you sort of indicated that the scheme, because of its sort of lack of planning status at the moment, would come forward between years 6 to 15. What I just wanted to understand was, as this is a council-owned site, is this is probably something we'll come on to in the land supply session, so we may have to come back to it, but is this within, there was a 1,700 home figure in the land supply for schemes in the council pipeline, is that correct?
Yes, no, this is additional.
This is separate to that, so I just wanted to understand the categorisation, whether it was within that or separate.
No, it's separate.
Okay.
Because we don't have any pipeline yet, so we just see these are more, I suppose, ones which we're not exactly clear on the exact uses on this site that will come forward, and because the C3 is a should, so we need to work out how the musts are going to be met first.
Okay, so it's effectively when it's ultimately shown for the purposes of land supply, it will just be shown as an allocation with a phasing between years 6 to 15, essentially.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's helpful from my perspective. That's probably covered what I wanted to ask. Again, Mr. Brearley has his hand up, so I'm just going to bring participants in. So, Mr. Brearley, please.
Thank you. Yes, well, I thought this was a good one to highlight. My question is, why is it put forward for redevelopment as a mixed scheme with housing, unless the only thing I can come up with is just the result of a panic to add up housing numbers on sites that will not upset more prosperous residential area voters, but maybe I'm just a little bit too skeptical about the process. Worth saying that other than railway arches, Boston rail depots, and the Old Kent Road and Park House clusters, the site allocations also target a further 14 little industrial areas, most of them very little, ones like this one, Tower Workshops. And that actually is the majority of the small number of surviving small industrial locations in the borough. There aren't many left. 3 of those happen to have already been emptied in anticipation of development, but all the others, including Tower Workshops, are fully occupied and thriving. Tower Workshops, it's owned by the council. Well, it's a particularly good one. And I think it's the last of the council's once numerous multi-let industrial premises. There's 45 units, there's 35 tenants, I think a few hundred jobs supported. It's hugely popular with businesses, including food and catering, printing, photography studios, the type that need heavier kits, gantries and stuff, slightly industrial, furniture makers and finishers. Well, since the council know well that there is severe shortage of such accommodation, and the GLA categorised the borough of no net loss, why would this and those 13 others be picked out for development with housing? All that loss from this site for a modest number of housing units, and similar applies across all those other site allocations. Add them all up, and it's not a major part of the housing delivery, those smaller industrial sites. I think this site should be strategic industrial land, even though it's small, and there should be work to slowly intensify it. A housing-led scheme, even mixed with business space, will lose all the businesses, no doubt at all. An example of what will almost certainly happen is what's happened with Valmar Trading Estate. That's one of the 3 that has been emptied. It has recently been given planning permission. The policy of same or more B1 has been met, surprise, surprise, with nil light industrial space. So it's a 100% loss. All the businesses have gone, and these businesses don't come back. It's worth noting there is almost nowhere for them to move to. So this just seems like a crazy thing to do. I just don't get it. Why would you torpedo lots of businesses and jobs in a really popular, good building for the sake of a few housing units? It's just not, when there's a severe shortage in the borough, and we know it's getting worse with what's in the pipeline already of dozens and dozens of permissions that strip out industrial. I just don't think it's at all sound to be doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Brearley. Ms. Seymour, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to what you just heard.
I'd just like to make 2 points, sir. The first is that this is an opportunity to provide housing once the other uses are delivered. That's why housing is a should, and the other uses are a must. And then the other comment that I'd just like to make is that this is again a should and not a must. So we're not using this housing projection towards the evidence to demonstrate that we can deliver our housing targets. So the comments around that are not relevant to this particular, all of the housing units to meet our housing target come from the musts and not the shoulds. And so I just think that that's not relevant for this site.
Thank you. The only thing I had a follow-up question, which I'd like to just ask now, while it's in my head. Just in terms of the should requirements, you've also got a requirement in terms of providing active frontages, say they're within B class, and then a should requirement, but you've then also got provide at least the amount of employment floor space B class as a must. How that quite works, because if all the B class has got to be re-provided as a must, and you've got an active frontages for Maltby Street as B class as being a should, I just wonder if there's a.
Yeah, we can clarify that. So
I think it may be related to the wider point we've discussed at length around changes to the use classes order, and whether there needs to be, whether you actually mean some of the what would have been the sub classes of B use, which are now in the sub classes of E.
Yes.
I'm just going to make a note for you to look at that, because I think there is an issue there.
Yes.
We'll bring you in a moment, Mr. Braley. I'm just making a note. Okay, I've made it. Mr. Braley, if you said a final point on that, you still had your hand up.
Well, yes, I'm pleased to hear that the housing numbers estimated here aren't relied on in the add up. I didn't know that. I think that just further magnifies the point that why on earth would you try and do it? It's just important to remember that not just in Southwark, but across London, there are virtually no examples of re-providing industrial with residential. It's just not happening. And to see what's happening with Valmar and several on Old Kent Road area as examples, you're just getting office, some kind of studio space, all good stuff, but it's meeting another need, a need that's a lot easier to meet because the values are a bit higher and the practicalities are a little bit less challenging. It is highly unlikely that this would re-provide. And anyway, you have to start again with the businesses. There are real businesses in buildings like this. They can't find anywhere else to go very easily, and you are going to destroy them or push them elsewhere if you try and redevelop it. It's just not a sane thing to do when you've got frictional vacancy that's way below what anyone thinks allows the market to function well. Like the places in crisis, there's no available space. People can't move. They're stuck. Try and redevelop it, you lose the economy. Simple as that.
Thank you, Mr. Braley. Ms. Seymour, if you had any, I'll give you the opportunity for the final word on that before we move on. Okay, in that case, I think we've probably gone as far as we can in terms of NSP 11. So I'll move now on to the next item on the agenda, which is NSP 12 and Chambers Wharf. So again, this is another site that now has, I've got, I previously indicated that this one has got, yes, it's got the two components on it, this site, and one partially completed for 180 units, is that right? And then another component is either finished or due to be imminently finished by the end of this year.
No, so this one is the one where we have the Thames Tunnel. So whilst there's a permission, they're building boreholes and tunnels and things, and some sites are used for storage of that equipment. So although this has been granted permission, the 407 units will be delivered when Thames Tunnel is completed, which will be after 2023. We feel confident that this will come forward, and that, you know, it has been partially completed, and it would have been completed, and it's arguable it would have been completed if it wasn't for the requirement for the Thames Tideway. So that's why we've put this in 6 to 15 years, but we know how much is going to be delivered on site. It's just a case of when they finish building the tunnel.
Yeah, sorry, I was coming to that, but there was I just noted that there were 2 blocks, and your EIP 82A document says that the first 180 units are partially complete, and it was the second element with the 407 that was remaining, but it was the only thing I was going to say was that I think there was a slight discrepancy in terms of that document and your response under question 10.31 in your statement, whether it was a typo or not. I'm keen to find out, but it was I think you'd indicated that in your statement under 10.31 407 homes would like to be complete in 2025.
Oh yes, so sorry, it's that's not true.
And so, and what I'm taking then in terms of the position is that it's EIP 82A is your position. Okay.
Yes, sorry about that. I don't know how that happened.
Let's make a note. I'm also just mindful again, is there any potential for any further slippage to the Thames Tideway project that might have any further bearing on delivery? Is there any, obviously you've not broken down when you think those 407 units could come forward within years 6 to 15. Is there any likelihood of risk of any of that extending beyond the planned period, or is there information or evidence that gives you confidence that it will take place between year 6 to 15, bearing in mind housing's a must requirement on that site?
The feedback from the Thames Tunnel team at the council is that that the Thames Tunnel is likely to complete, and then we will be able to use that site. That there's no definite until that happens. We can't be sure absolutely definitely, because you don't know what might come up with Thames Tideway. But our current understanding is there's no reason for any more hold up.
Okay. That might be something that we might just need to, again, this might be something that we'll come to on the land supply session. There might need to be some perhaps further detail and articulation of some of that, and what ultimately gives you the confidence that it's going to be completed. And as I say, bearing in mind it's a must requirement, albeit you've not included it in the 5-year, your first 5 years of phasing. It's in year 6 to 15. So there's but it might be useful to understand some of that detail. So, but I've got your, I'm clear on what the position is in terms of the figures at the moment. Now, I was just again, this was another sort of, is there, going to my good old favourite of open space. Obviously, it's a very significant site, part of which is partially completed, part of which is remaining. Is there any? I'm presuming open space was secured on site as part of the permission. Was there anything in that regard that needed to be reflected in the policy for soundness? Or is that adequately covered elsewhere? I think was probably one.
Yes, I mean, this is part of the Thames policy area. So the main priority was to enhance the Thames path, in addition to ensuring that there was amenity space and other space in the site. There's no space that we would be looking to designate. So there was nothing that I thought should come forward as part of this site allocation.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. It was just upon clarification. That's useful. That probably brings me to the end of what I wanted to ask on NSP 12. Again, I'll invite if there are any points that anyone wishes to make. Mr. Brady had a point on this site or not. I don't see a hand. So in that case, to try and keep us on track, that sort of brings us to the end of the sort of Bermondesy vision session. So we've got a few bits and pieces to look at again for other sessions. So moving on, that then brings us to the Blackfriars Road area vision discussion from item 5 onwards. I didn't have any particular questions in relation to the area vision for Blackfriars Road that haven't been answered elsewhere. So I was going to provide, open the discussion up if anyone had points on Blackfriars Road vision. Now is a good time to raise those. And so unless I see any hands go up, I will move on to item 6 then, which gets us back into the realms of the site allocations and NSP 13. Just, this was one of my my attempts to make sure that my agendas thoroughly covered all the sites in each area and provide participants with an opportunity if they wanted to say anything on some of these, but I don't have any particular concerns on NSP 13 as it stands at the moment. And obviously in this regard, the requirements in terms of the applications, you've updated that very recently in the IP82A, and both sites are, both parts of the site, you've got a live application on part of the site, and then there's an area remaining. Both of those are phased for years 6 to 15. I'm guessing that sort of reflects general uncertainty and timing of the planning application as it stands at the moment. The application is obviously live and under consideration as we sit here today. So, okay, well, if nobody had any further points on NSP 13, I shan't prolong it. We'll get into the sites where I do have some further questions. We'll move on to NSP 14, which is Friars House. Now, this is a site where most of the site has the benefit of planning permission, of it's subject to section 106. But I see your latest update says that that permission has now been issued and the legal agreement's been secured. So that's covers hotel, flexible office, community space, and retail development. Again, this was a sort of another question in terms of, does the policy itself reflect all of the approved uses on site, particularly vis-a-vis hotel?
No. So we need to update that, sorry.
The question is, for sounders, should it, bearing in mind the approach that you sort of adopted in terms of sites that have either got permission or are under construction?
Yes, this one is one that's been quite an ongoing situation, and so it's quite recently. I thought we had proposed an amendment to this site, but if we haven't, we will need to, just to reflect the current situation.
If you have, Miss Sim, well, you might just need to remind me the reference to the document you put it forward in.
Yes. No, I was just checking. I don't think we have. That's why I said I thought we had, but I need to actually do. I think we need to do that. The reason why we haven't put it in was because we didn't want to encourage hotel use to come forward, and so that's why it hadn't happened. So that if the hotel was not delivered on this site, it could be re-looked at. We don't want to actually require a hotel because the council doesn't want a hotel. It refused it. It's overturned an appeal. We recognise that there's now a decision, and that one condition was granted on the 26th of Feb 21. There's another one under consideration now, and there's 2 pre-commencement conditions to discharge to start to enable works to start on the hotel and the car park, and we do expect those to be started by the end of this year. But we weren't in any rush, to be honest, to update this site because the council doesn't support a hotel on it. And local members really do not support a hotel on this site.
Okay, well, I mean, you've obviously reflected the planning application in the site requirement section. I think my concern was where you've taken the approach of updating policies elsewhere to reflect live planning applications, but this one you hadn't. I wanted to understand the rationale and whether that was sound, having regard to the overall consistency of approach.
I think the other ones we didn't have any issue with the change of use, but this one's council has quite a strong political position on, and that's why it was refused.
Well, as I say, I think it's, as I say, we need to understand across the piece what the justification for making changes. In some cases, you said these are necessary factual changes, but this strikes me as a factual change, but you then don't want to make. And I understand the point, and I'm sure you don't want to further it, but you'll also understand that there's there is a point of consistency and an overall effectiveness of the approach you're taking. So, well, I'll leave that to you to reflect at the moment, but I think it's probably something that's going to need to be done if you're doing it elsewhere.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did I have any? Yes, I did. Now, obviously, the site is, the majority of the site is sort of obviously covered by the aforementioned permission, but there is a small parcel remaining without. Does the policy sort of provide sufficient flexibility to the remainder, or is there? I noticed in your statement you reflected the remainder of the site in terms of building of architectural and historic merit. Unlikely further comprehensive development would occur. You've taken out any sort of housing requirement. I suppose the question is there? Does the policy adequately deal with what you want to see happen on the remainder of the site?
Well, I think we need to update the site to show the area, the remainder. We would expect a modest uplift in office, retail and community uses, which was what we set out in matter 10A, question 10.33. So that now that this site is coming forward and to be delivered, we could look at a smaller site with the floor space that remains and what would be appropriate on that site. It hasn't been appropriate to do that up until now. But now that the site does have some conditions and is moving forward, we could look at that to be clear about what needs to come forward. If you'd like us to do that, so.
I think it does need to be clear, because I mean, and this is perhaps where the must, should, and may approach perhaps is quite hard to keep up with developments on the ground in terms of what's being provided, how that's then translated into where you've got a balance of the site that's left, because obviously what we're not clear on is what the extent of the floor space that's subject to the permission, and what the remaining floor space is in existing use that might be required to provide the same amount of employment floor space or otherwise. Again, it's just trying to understand how the nuts and bolts of this work when you've got multiple parts of the site coming forward at different times in different uses, some of which the uses are listed in the policy and some of which they're not because of other reasons, including the appeal process. So
I think the thing about this site is that the use class, that we don't ask for the use class that's being permitted. So this one's a bit different to any of the others. So where we use the musts and the shoulds, normally the musts get permitted if the site is split. The musts get permitted, and then if they're all permitted, then the should gets permitted. Whereas on this site, that we didn't want a hotel on the site, and so it's a bit different to the others. There's not much more potential on this site for development. So I suppose our option is whether we amend the use class to show what's actually being delivered on site and leave it at that, or whether we look at whether there is any remaining capacity. We don't consider there to be much remaining capacity on the site. That was the point about the site that we made in the matter 10A.
Yes, yes, I think I'm going to send you away to go and have a think about this one, because I think there is an issue in terms of making sure that if you're retaining the allocation, if there's limited potential with the remainder, that the plan is clear on what you want to see happen on the remainder, and obviously whether the must require, having regard to the permission that you strongly believe is likely to be implemented, whether all of the must requirements are still the same. If they are still the same, then okay, there's less of an issue. If they're not the same, and the must requirements on what's left are no longer appropriate, then perhaps that does need to be reconsidered in terms of, in order for the allocation to be sound.
I don't think we would change the allocation, because we would not put a must for a hotel into this allocation. So I suppose the question is whether we remove the allocation or whether we just leave it as it is with what's coming forward now, so that if it didn't get built, we still have the opportunity, if a site came forward in the future, to enable it to deliver the land uses that we would like.
Yes. Yes, I think I need to have a bit more of a think about just the mechanics. I think it's probably just worth us flagging this as a one that needs looking at, because I think it does need to be. I can understand the position of the council, but equally, as I say, there is a consistency issue there with the approach you've taken elsewhere that is somewhat taxing to reconcile. And I understand the competing views that probably exist locally in respect of this, but nonetheless, it may well be that some further descriptive text to articulate what might need to happen on the remainder needs to be placed somewhere within the policy for soundness in order for it to be effective. So I'll probably leave my thoughts at that for the moment, Ms. Seymour, and we'll perhaps come back to that, and you can provide me with a note on your thoughts in due course. Okay, that's probably as far as I can take that one. Mr. Brearley, now's a good time for you to make your points.
Thank you. I apologise. I think I might be getting confused with my site numbering because they have changed. Is NSP 13 the previous one? That's Kanoko House and Quadrant House, etc. Is it?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Is it all right if I do say something on that one?
If you can be brief, yes, because I don't want to go back.
I'll try to be brief. You know, I'm always very brief, sort of. I just thought this was a good one to pick out with the don't forget that Southwark's already 24 hectares short actual and pipeline loss of industrial. So some bold moves are needed to address the issue of shortage in relation to need. And this site just seems like a very good example of this type of site that could easily be required to provide industrial space in its development mix. It would be perfect, for example, for last mile logistics and other such highly location sensitive, just in time urban industrial uses. If Southwark is to address this massive shortfall in relation to industrial accommodation need, then a shift of approach is needed. I was struck with the response to suggestions like this in my various representations, which I paraphrase, it was something like, no, we're not doing that. That's irrelevant. We're not doing any industrial where there isn't currently industrial. Well, I just thought that was really problematic. If the need is to be met, that's not the way to do it. I mentioned yesterday, I think, or whenever it was, a basement logistics hub in the City of London proposed, just a walk away from this particular site. Also just announced actually an initiative by the Corporation of London themselves, a deal with Amazon to use as a logistics hub one of their own parking garages in the city. And it just seems like it's time for Southwark Council to wake up. It's no longer the 1990s where all industrial is evaporating from cities. There are very particular industrial needs in this part of London and relating to the servicing of central London, and extensive space is needed for them, but the NSP flunks it. It needs to be flagging this up on particular sites, like this one seemed like a good example. But at the moment, without that happening, the need is just not addressed. It's been ignored. I don't know whether it's just that they don't like us or something, but they've ignored the need. It's not sound.
Thank you, Mr. Brearley. I think I'm clear on the point. I know we were talking about NSP 14, and I sort of reached the end of my points on it, but I'll just give the council the final opportunity if there's anything further you wanted to add from what Mr. Brearley's just said, or anything further on NSP 14.
No, thank you, sir.
Okay. Again, I'm just mindful. I obviously don't want to rush the discussion, but equally, I'm mindful that we do need to make some progress on the agenda as well. So with that, I'm going to move on to NSP 15, which is item 8 on the agenda. Now this was a scheme that I believe, just looking at your latest update, is part of the allocation is actually completed. Is that right? I've got
Yes, sir.
shown in EIP 82A. I suppose the question with this one is, as you know that this has definitely been completed, is it still justified to include the completed bit in the allocation? And if so, is the number of sort of homes indicated a net figure? Is there, are the homes indicated still capable of coming forward on the remainder?
No, so in the matter 10A, we set out under this site, I'm trying to look at the number now, 10.37 on page 24, I think it is, yeah, number 3, that we do not expect a comprehensive redevelopment now on this site, and the 168 dwellings need to be revised in the 5 and 15-year land supply, and there needs to be a site allocations methodology update. This is a should, so we haven't relied on this figure.
Yes, I think that's that is an important distinction. But just in terms of your statement, you've obviously indicated. Did you say you had included the update in the revised 5 and 15? Or it needs to be done, right? Okay, I'll just okay, I'll make a list. This is well, I think we can comfortably call this one firmly in the main modifications territory, Ms. Seymour. But do you have an indication of what at this stage? Feel free to say to provide this separately. But do you have an indication of what the figures might be? I'm just looking at your.
No, so we need to work that out. That was on our to-do list that we haven't done yet. Okay,
I think that probably needs to yes, float itself fairly rapidly up the to-do list, I'm afraid, of your burgeoning homework list, because that is something we need to look at. So just to be clear, you're proposing to amend not only the site area, but essentially the overall requirements for the site. Is there likely to be any other significant change in terms of the must requirements?
No, sir.
So the B class.
Yes.
B class requirement would remain.
Yes.
Okay. But the should requirement will
yes.
Just making a note of this so it's clear in terms of when we do the action note what the expectations are and what we're likely to see come forward. Apologies while I just writing this out. Okay. I think that's probably again as far as we're going to be able to take things at the moment until we see that that revised allocation and policy from you. So in that case, it seems to really has left us. So I'm presuming he doesn't have any comments he wishes to make on that at the moment. In that case, I will move us along briefly to NSP 16, and this one's got planning permission, and I think according to your latest statements now under construction.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and again, in terms of timing of the delivery of residential units, is that taken from sort of developer information?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
So a bit more straightforward when you've got a scheme that's actually under construction. So, and you've got both elements under construction there, and both to come forward within 5 years. Okay. Yeah, as I said, I didn't only put that on the agenda as I think that was probably the agenda was written before I had a chance to look at your updated statement, your updated document which came in last week. So if there are no further comments, I shall move us along to NSP 17. which is Southwark Station and 1 James Street. Again, this was just a case of establishing perhaps where we are in terms of planning applications on the site. So there's a scheme that's been resolved to grant planning permission subject to a legal agreement.
Yes, that's quite recent. That was in February, and their legal agreement is currently being negotiated. I don't have the exact detail on when that's going to be signed off, but I can provide that for you. I can ask the case officer that information.
I think you can probably, again, that's probably something that you can provide an update on orally for the land supply session, and then we can follow up with a subsequent note. But again, essentially the net uplift on that, which you've shown in terms of the housing requirement, I'm presuming that will be just based on a development management expectations of timeframe, or is that from developer information directly?
Sorry, I keep muting because my children keep running upstairs. Sorry, it's from the developer.
Okay, yeah. Okay. What I did just want to check. In terms of the applications, is the indicative, having regard to residential being a should requirement, I know there's obviously a net uplift of a relatively modest sort of 16 net units, but just in terms of the planning applications and their coverage of the site, is that indicative residential capacity still sound and justified?
Sorry, I'm just checking this one again. I think so. I think that I would like to just recheck that one, because that is what I understood is going forward. Yeah, so yes. Yeah. No, that's, yeah, so that's what we've got. Yes, so sorry, I don't need to check that. Yes, that is accurate. Sorry, so I was just double checking.
So the indicative capacity is, and again, this is whilst housing is a should requirement on the site. Has that 130 homes figure come from sort of planning information, preliminary inquiry?
So that's come from looking at the site and looking at how much development that we think can go on the site, and then just discussing it with the case officers and the design team and doing an assessment to see how much development that we think should go on the site. Okay,
as I said, I'm just mindful of the sort of the boundary of what looks like the red line of the planning approval and whether that had any implications. But if you still think that number is justified,
yes.
Okay. I don't think I have anything further to inquire on that particular site. So unless there's any further points that you wanted to cover on that one, I'll move on to NSP 18. Just again, in terms of this scheme, does the indicative capacity, is it clear in terms of whether this is for C3 use directly, or whether this is the bearing in mind is there an application for student housing on the site, or is that figure the ratio that the equivalent ratio of C3 housing has been worked out from student accommodation?
Yeah, so this is student accommodation at the moment, this building.
Mhm.
So that's why this one is down for this, and so that's why we're looking at that. But so we say provide new homes C3 or student accommodation. So in our view, we wouldn't preclude conventional housing being built on this site. So that's why it's set out in the way that it is. We don't envisage that would come forward because of the owner of the site, but if they were, which is South Bank, but if they ever did sell the site, then it could come forward.
That's okay. Well, what I was trying to understand is if there was any further application for intensification of student accommodation, whether that figure was effectively like a worked back figure in terms of what the C3 figure would be and how it translates. That was where the sort of question was. Sorry, I perhaps could have made myself clearer there.
Sorry, yes. So we use the equivalent of the C3 housing and then look at how many student rooms could be put into that. So it's the same methodology that we use looking at conventional housing, and then we just use the London Plan definition for how many student rooms you could fit within the size of a conventional unit.
Yeah, so that's 250. So your methodology is based on working back from the ratio of student unit.
Yeah, it's 2.5 student homes per unit. That's what it says in the London Plan.
Yeah, I've got that in the notes. Okay, that's helpful. The only other point I had on this site was, again, just sort of looking at the design and design requirements. It talks about the sort of the concave frontage. Again, is this one of those sort of things that's in sort of, it talks about it being guidance? Is effectively that a must requirement of the site? The importance of that concave design to the overall.
That is a must. That is a must. So we should. I'm just reading it now. I think we should move it to the must because this is really important because this is on St George's Circus and there's the obelisk. So it's really it is a must. It's not a conversation.
Yeah, as I say, I did ask you the sort of whether the council was had an appetite to perhaps move some things if we found them that were very firmly in the must category. I think this is one of those examples where it is so clear that it's obviously something very important. I think it does need for soundness and for the policy to be effective for that to be placed again front and centre in that site requirements must list.
Yes, yes, sir. We would definitely concur on that.
Okay. That's probably covered all of my questions on NSP 18. Again, if you had any other final mop-up points on NSP 18, if not, I will move us along to NSP 19, which is a site that I believe is now under construction, according to your updated document.
Just checking. Sorry, so I'm just turning to the right page to get to the right site.
108, I think it is, of EIP 82A.
Okay, thank you. Yes, right. Okay, so this one, it's been approved with a legal agreement. It's under construction. Yeah, so this one's under construction now. So we've set this one out, what's going to be delivered and when we think it will come forward. Again, this one we consulted with the regeneration team who've been discussing with the developers to work out when this site might come forward and how the phasing might work.
Again, I think this was a case where the sort of the overall number is a fairly even split, 96, 96, 96, and whether that was based on just a sort of council's approximate estimate of dividing the site, or whether that was based on the developer's own project planning for the scheme.
Yeah, I discussed this one with Regeneration, one of the managers over there, and that was their understanding from talking to the developers, what was going to come forward.
And just again, in terms of, this may be something we come on to, obviously we talked a bit about where there are schemes of numerous stories in terms of sort of flatted developments, things like that. The profile can be somewhat lumpy, and I was just keen to understand, because my eye was obviously drawn to the fact that you've got an even split of 96 per year over 3 years, and whether if there was flatted development, excuse me, on the site, whether that projection was robust.
I think in Southwark, the way that it works is that there's a certain number that can be sold in certain areas per year for the best price. So that's how many tends to come forward in that year. And that seems to be the profiles that we have from developments, and it's different in different parts of the borough. So I imagine that that's what that's based on. That seems to be how, so quite a bit of our, there's a certain amount of a certain type of property that can be sold for the best price in a certain time frame, or it might just be what they can build in that time frame. So it's usually one of those two. I don't know on that specific site, but that's the feedback we get from Regeneration and from developers on all of our schemes.
Yes. Okay. Probably not a lot further to add on that at the moment. In that case, there's nothing further on that. We'll perhaps move down the agenda to the final item, which is NSP 20. Now, I'll just get myself down to this one. It was just a brief check on the status. Now, I've written a question about the status of application 17 AP 4230, but I think you've probably answered that in your updated document in terms of that's now decision notice issued, legal agreement has been signed, and it's approved in all respects now. So not rather than a resolution to grant permission by planning committee. So. On the basis that there's no residential development in the application, as I understand it, is there any? I suppose you're probably going to tell me you want to keep the residential in the should requirements in case the permission lapses.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes.
I think
that area. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it was just whether there was merit in that. Bearing in mind, it's that there's nothing left of the allocation if it's implemented for those other uses. Then clearly, there wouldn't be an opportunity to then provide the residential. But as it's not yet, if it's been fairly recently resolved, approved, and the decision notice issued, then there's still quite a period to go before that scheme may be implemented.
Yes, sir, and that's really important in that area because the mix of uses and is really essential for enabling the vibrancy and the really distinct uses up there. So I don't think that we'd want to change that at the moment.
Okay.
And the application was approved with the legal agreement on the 28th of January 21.
The legal agreement is fairly recently signed.
Yeah.
Okay. My only other point was whether it probably doesn't need to be said, but I'll ask the question in any event, is whether the site guidance is sufficiently clear about retention of the listed buildings on site. But I think in terms of it is included in the list of matters under the site location, isn't it?
Yes, so it is. The reference to the listed buildings is made clear in the diagram as well as in the commentary below. As it stands, the permission does include preserving the listed buildings and extending them modestly at the top.
Yes, yeah. I was just obviously there are obviously the wording talks about also the proximity of listed buildings, 17 Stamford Street, but I'm presuming that's the area of that's shown in the plan that's also Grade 2 listed elsewhere on along Hatfields, which is just outside the red line, I think.
Yes.
Directly adjacent might have been slightly better wording, but I'm not sure that's necessary for soundness. But I think it's I think it's perhaps clear what the intention was.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. I think we've probably covered the extent that I wanted to ask on that. The only other thing is, again, it's occurred to me quite late in the day, is whether if you're retaining the should requirement for providing new homes, whether there was any need for an indicative residential capacity, because you set that as 0, presuming you've done that to reflect the planning permission on site, and whether there needed to be any wording or anything in place of that, because if you're retaining the requirement that residential should.
We're not expecting any residential, so it's just there.
It's a fallback, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm clear on that. That was it in terms of my my questions in terms of the agenda. I think we've covered everything quite thoroughly. I did say I wanted to finish at 5 o'clock, and it's 2 minutes past, so I've broken my my own timings, but not significantly. Obviously, Mr. Brearley's had the opportunity to have his say and has left the session. So whether there was anything further from your perspective, Ms. Seymour, that you wanted to close on, any final points before I close the session for today?
No, thank you.
Okay, there's quite a few sort of actions and things that have come out of these sessions. So obviously we'll have to take we'll take stock obviously at an appropriate point at the end of this week, and obviously update the various action lists and so forth. But hopefully you also got a record of everything that's going to be necessary.
Yes.
Okay, in that case, I shan't prolong matters any further other than to thank everyone for their participation. And in that case, the hearing session is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.